Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. As always on Tuesdays, joining us is Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter, the regent of redstate.com. Welcome back, Andrew. It's another week in, and they seem to be going faster these days. I don't know why.
They do. Yeah. You know what? I share a birthday day and a birthday year with Britt Hume. And we were talking once, and we agreed that 0 to 60 was, give or take 60 years. But 60 and beyond, boom, just flashed by.
Well, that's not good news for me because I'm turning 60 in about 6 weeks.
Well, I'm beyond.
Beyond. All right. Well, now I know what to expect. More of this. But lots to discuss this week. The big news this morning was that Joe Biden made a surprise trip to Ukraine, which is, that's how you make trips to war zones, is surprise. Although in this case, apparently, the news was, Andrew, that Biden had alerted Moscow that he was going there, and basically, I think to say,
don't try anything.
Don't try anything. Yeah, I'm not going to appreciate an aerial show in Kyiv while I'm there. Interesting.
Yeah, it is. That's what Miley did during the Trump administration. He alerted his chief of staff, alerted his Chinese counterpart that, don't worry, we won't let Trump do anything crazy on the military. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you talk to the other side. I guess if Biden's talking himself, I guess that's okay. I'm just not sure. I guess it's Biden being safe, and that's Biden. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think under the circumstances, I mean, this isn't Afghanistan or Iraq, right? I mean, we're not technically at war in Ukraine. We're supplying one of the sides, but we're technically not at war. So, I mean, when George Bush and Barack Obama, for that matter, and Joe Biden, for that matter, had to fly into Afghanistan or Iraq during the war years, it was always secret. Nobody was alerted to it until after it happened.
Right.
And there's good reasons for that. I think in this case, deconfliction probably is a good idea up front, just because you don't want to start a war over a mistake, right? Because if they targeted the president of the United States, if Russia targeted the president of the United States, either accidentally or on purpose, that goes a long way to pushing you into a position of war.
Yes.
So with that said, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just think it's it may be wise in a diplomatic sense, but in a personal sense, or an image sense, telling Russia that you're going there and basically to give more arms.
Yeah.
If Putin is crazy, he's crazy. And I guess he's sure he's not crazy. We seem to have somebody close to Putin sending out intel. But anyway, so anyway, he did it, and I understand he's left the country, so he got away with it for now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that this is a bad thing. He's like the last Western leader to do this.
Exactly. So that's another reason. Another reason why he had to.
Yeah. What's your estimation of what the impact on this is? If he had done this a year ago, I think it would have been a massive impact.
Yeah.
I think 1 year later, after the start of the war, when everybody and their brother has gone to go stand with Zelensky in Kyiv.
Yeah. I think it's less now, less of an impact. I think it's important to show the ongoing support, both in a photo op, which is basically why he went, but also in more weapons. I gather there's some Republicans and maybe others who were growing opposition to giving Ukraine this stuff, and I'm I'm all for it. Honestly, I think if there's somebody willing to fight Russia and to deplete their military power without any of our sons and daughters and fathers and mothers being involved, and we just send them materiel, I'm all for it. Because if Putin wins in Ukraine, even if he just like gets half the country or something, his next move, aggressors don't stop until they are stopped.
Right.
Hitler's a perfect example of that. We basically gave up Czechoslovakia, and so he took it as, okay, well, I can keep going, and he did. And then we had to fight so much harder and so much blood spilled to counter it. So, if Putin thinks, well, okay, they're not really supporting Ukraine anymore because they got tired of it, just like I thought they would. And Russia is, I forgot the numbers, but it's multiple times more in terms of population and size than Ukraine. So the long game plays to Russia's strength. And if he's successful there, however he defines success, then he can go after the Baltic states, which are in NATO. And the minute the first explosion happens, the United States is in it. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that the likelihood of that is a lot less than it used to be. But Moldova probably would be a target if Putin succeeds, and that's
well, that's not NATO. So, but yeah, he
not
could get
NATO,
that.
but it's very, very close. Moldova is very, very close. And yeah, I mean, I think that I don't have a problem with supporting Ukraine in this. Ukraine is not the aggressor here. Russia's the aggressor. Ukraine is the victim of just flat out attempt to imperial territorial acquisition, and you can't let that stand for the reasons that you just said. And I think that Biden did the right thing, but as Biden, in going to Kyiv today, but as Biden usually does, he does the right thing only after exhausting all of the other possibilities.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what we saw today. It's like,
and with the military aid, there are those who are wise and experienced in military who think that he's stretching it out, that he needs to, he could have done the tanks last summer and then they'd be almost there. Now they're still a ways away. The German tanks will be there soon, if not already. But he's stringing out the aid, which is better than nothing. But what it does is it helps produce a stalemate, and a stalemate plays to Russia's strength.
It does. It does. I think you're right about that. The problem is that they're not even really achieving a stalemate. And that's the reason why I think they're getting very frustrated right now, is that it's not that there's a stalemate going on. They're getting their forces chewed into, oblivion.
Yeah.
And they're throwing everything that they've got at Ukraine, and they're not advancing. And in some cases, they're going the wrong direction.
Right.
In the meantime, they're chewing through. And there's another story out here today. And I was kind of curious about this. I didn't mention it to you before we got started. Radar Online notes that, which is whenever I want to know about, global security, I always go to Radar Online.
That's the National Enquirer, isn't it?
Basically, it's the National Enquirer. It's a slightly more reliable National Enquirer, but they're citing a different publication. The Chechen warlord is announcing that he's going to create his own private army to compete against the Wagner group, right?
Oh, jeez.
And there's a real problem here when you've got a state that is encouraging the people to form private armies, is that eventually you got these warlords that are going to end up fighting each other,
and they turn on you. Yeah.
Well, and what happens then? Then you've got Moscow, which becomes a failed state, right? and you've got 8 time zones of danger, basically.
Well, not to mention thousands of warheads.
That's what I mean. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got, I mean, that's an incredibly bad thing. And and the reason why, I'm sure the reason why the Chechen warlord wants to take charge of this is Kadyrov. I mean, this is a well-known guy. He's a Putin ally, but for how long is one question.
Yeah.
And B, why does he want to form a private army? It's because he doesn't want Putin running his men, basically, because the Kremlin is incredibly bad at this.
Oh, they're awful. Yeah, they've proven awful.
Yeah.
And every day this goes on, Putin looks weaker. So it's a total mess, and it's a total mess of his own making, which is sort of like a Greek tragedy, is what Trump did too.
Yeah, it's a Greek tragedy. It's it's hubris all over again, right? Over winning.
Exactly. Yeah.
And but
he's not going to admit defeat.
I'm not. I don't know if it's so much of a Greek tragedy or if it's, and pardon the pun, a Wagnerian tragedy. Because, in Wagner's Ring, what happens is that basically they torch Valhalla and everything burns to the ground, and that's not I mean, that's a really bad situation if that's what happens in Russia.
Valhalla. You need Valhalla. You need the idea of Valhalla anyway.
Yeah, right. I mean,
and I don't mind the music either.
Dun, 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 dun.
I love the smell of Valhalla burning in the morning.
I was just about to quote Apocalypse Now. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Yeah. The I mean, it's important, I think, to see Ukraine prevail here, just in keeping Imperial Russia in check, because that's what it is. It's always been that way. It's always been imperial. There's a good piece in Foreign Policy about that too. And the question that they ask is, can you even have a non-imperial Russia? I mean, knowing the Russian character, knowing the Russian psyche, is there any such thing as a non-imperial Russia? And my argument, and I have it in the headline, I write a whole post about it, is that the Russian Federation is so diverse ethnically and culturally, because again, 8 time zones, right? That I don't think that you can hold it together without an imperial ethos. I don't think it sticks without an imperial ethos. And I think that's what Yeltsin discovered when Yeltsin tried to move away from that and ended up getting, eventually having to cede power and bring in Putin, which is how we got Putin in the first place. So yeah, I mean, I think there's some real questions there as to, what it is that you can actually do.
And what they're doing, both the Wagner Group and the Russian army, is basically throwing these untrained guys at the Ukrainians. And as I said earlier, there's a lot more Russians than there are Ukrainians. I think the population of Ukraine is California plus Houston and San Antonio, and that's it. And though they can fight as valiantly as they want, but if it's just these hordes of Russians who will get shot if they retreat or get shot if they advance, they don't mind. Stalin did the same thing in World War II.
Well, he did the same thing in Afghanistan too. It didn't work out as well in Afghanistan.
No, it didn't work out as well. And Jimmy Carter helped feed that. Not the Taliban, but the Mujahideen.
Yeah, well, Jimmy Carter did, and I mean, there's also Jimmy Carter's in the news this week. I mean, Jimmy Carter checked himself into hospice care rather than back into the hospital. So he's,
and something interesting about that. I covered the whole right to die movement, and Raquel Welch was in the movie of it, of my book, when she passed last week. If let's see, Jimmy Carter has been very open about his health situation. He had melanoma that went into his brain and his liver, and and his treatments and his frequent falls. I mean, that's very brave, but he couldn't have done that when he was president. I don't mean because he was president, but the social ethos at that time, end of life decisions were secret, very secret, because they were so emotional. We had all the new advanced medical technology that could feed you artificial food. It could breathe for you. It could clean your blood. You could be comatose, and machines could do all of this. But the new question erupted back in the 80s, which is, when do you not do everything you can do? Yep. And Jimmy Carter obviously has decided that he's not going to do any more medical interventions. He's going to go home. They can give him medicines to keep him comfortable, reduce the pain, whatever it is he's got wrong, they haven't said. And he'll be with his family in his modest ranch-style home in Plains. But, back in the 70s, you couldn't do that because the doctors would be feared of getting charged with killing somebody. You have a daughter who says, my dad said he didn't want to be kept alive on machines. And I think we should let him go. But then her brother arrives from Arizona and he's feeling guilty for not taking care of his father. And he says, no, doc, you got to do everything you want. Well, the only way the doctor can get in trouble legally and morally is to do what the patient wanted. And that's crazy. So yeah, hats off to Jimmy Carter. I've been going through some of his background, and he's done some admirable stuff over the years. And he's had a wonderful post-presidency, the longest, but I think also the most productive and positive.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about Jimmy Carter.
So do I.
But certainly I'm not gonna get into, I'm not gonna start, eulogizing a guy negatively when he's still around, and he's this close. There's a certain dignity that needs to pertain to these sorts of things. There's time there's been plenty of time to assess Jimmy Carter's presidency in the 40 plus years since it ended.
Yeah, that's right.
And there'll be plenty of time to assess the entirety of his life after he's passed. But in this period, I think the best thing that we can just do is to note that this is a remarkable guy. First off, living to 98 is remarkable in and of itself.
Yeah.
And being vital for almost the entire time is remarkable in and of itself. And
everybody in his family died from cancer. His father and his 3 siblings all died from pancreatic cancer.
So, yeah. So there's obviously some sort of genetic.
But he's made it long after they did, longer than they did.
Right.
I think it's the peanuts.
It could be the peanuts. It could be the peanuts. Do you remember a film called Whose Life Is It Anyway?
Yes, Richard Dreyfuss. And it was a play on Broadway too, I think.
It was originally a play on Broadway. They turned it into a film. And it tackled all these things. Now, what it didn't do is it didn't go into assisted suicide. Well, it did actually a little bit go into assisted suicide, but this was more or less the doctors just making him comfortable. In the very end, spoiler alert. I'm going to give you a spoiler on a 40-year-old movie, folks. The spoiler alert is he goes to court, fights for the right to not have extraordinary interventions carried out on him. And that was a really interesting construct too, because it talked about how the system was set up that basically, if you expressed that desire, it meant that you were mentally not competent to make decisions for yourself.
Yeah.
And so it was a catch-22. He fought the doctor. The doctor he's a good actor. He didn't do a ton of stuff. He was also in All That Jazz as a doctor. Or it may have been it could have been Nick Cassavetes. Actually, now I'm thinking, maybe it was Nick Cassavetes and not the other actor I'm thinking of, but it was really good. And in the end, he ends up prevailing in court, and the doctor comes, so he's going to check himself out of the hospital, and the doctor says to him, look, I just want to make sure you're comfortable. You don't need to leave. I promise I won't contradict what you want. And so the end is just sort of him, you just see him waiting to die, and you can see the anxiety in his face. It's really it's a tough movie to watch. Actually, Richard Dreyfuss is brilliant in it.
Well, I covered that issue back in the mid '80s, and I did a book about it. And actually, I faced the same decisions in my family. And I spent weeks at a hospital where these decisions were constantly being made.
Yeah.
And I mean, it blows your mind. Now, this is what 30 plus years ago.
Yeah.
But where a man, elderly man, comes in because he's got back pain, and so they look at him and they do all the tests. They find out that he's got back pain because he's got bone cancer, and the cancer is eating up all of his bones. And they can give him medicine that will weed out, or what do you call it, filter out the calcium. But if they don't, calcium builds up and it stops his heart. And I was there when the doctor was talking with him, telling him the situation and giving him the alternative. And the next day he went home, and 2 weeks later he died.
Yeah.
But I guess I still reel from the stunning realization that we now have machines that can do this. And but the machines advanced much faster and further than our own ethics did. And nobody in the families typically wants to talk about end of life. Say, oh, no, Grandpa, you're going to live forever. And he doesn't. And then nobody knows what he would have wanted. And the doctor could only get in trouble by pulling the plug.
Yep.
It's an amazing situation. And it was fascinating to write about. I'm sure not fascinating to live, but
yeah. And that's all kind of coming back with the Carter. I think it's interesting how those issues are a little bit more settled than they used to be.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And if it's cancer, they won't do anything. But with a lot of these cases, if it's something else, they will donate the organs. And I was in on some of those donations and tracking lungs that went to Pittsburgh and eyes that went to California and kidneys. I was in on the kidney transplants. It blows your mind. That's trite, but it's true.
Yeah. What's
going on and what you're witnessing, and it's grand, but it's also scary because nobody wants to face it before decision time.
John Cassavetes, by the way. It was John Cassavetes, not Nick Cassavetes. It was John Cassavetes who played the doctor in the movie. So
by the way, Ed, if something happens to me, I want you to marry somebody else. You remember that wonderful skit in Modern Family where the woman says to her husband, if anything happened to me, I'd want you to remarry. And he says, okay. And she says, that was a little fast. And and he said, well, I just want you to be happy. She said, okay. If you did remarry, do you have any idea who that would be? And he said, oh, Vicki Evans at The Office. She's wonderful. And the daughter walks by. The daughter walks by and says, are you talking about Vicki? Oh, Mom, she's wonderful. She's just wonderful. And the wife is sitting there looking very askance. And then the husband says, well, if anything happens to me, and she interrupts him and says, oh, something's going to happen to you.
Yeah, that's almost a given at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Something's going to happen to you.
Okay. All right, so we want to get to your columns here too. And your VIP column, most recent VIP column, is about Joe Biden's policies. Joe Biden's policies quite simply damaged the U.S.
Oh.
I think 2 years in, that also might be a given. I mean, but it's
it is, but my point was, it's intentional. Who in their right mind? I don't care if you want everybody to own their own airplane or whatever. who in their right mind would, within 24 hours of taking office, start destroying energy independence?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like if you took away all the oil, everybody can have an electric car today. They couldn't afford it, and the system wouldn't support it. The grid, and who could afford a $120,000 electric vehicle or whatever they cost now? So that's intentional. And then to go and beg the Saudi Arabia, oh, could you produce more oil? I cut some of mine, but I want you to do more.
Right.
And the disregarding the general's advice in Afghanistan and creating such a clusterfuck there that
I mean, just the disgrace of that. I mean, that was just absolutely disgraceful.
Awful. Just awful. You and I talked about that. And he still calls it an extraordinary success. And then the spending, the wanton spending that created the inflation, which is a universal tax on every single person in this country. And now he's like he did on gas. Oh, gas doesn't cost $6 anymore. It's only $3.75. And that's supposed to be good. And now he's saying, well, inflation is only 6.5% instead of 9%. Well, it's just so phony. Now, he doesn't do any shopping. Obviously, his servants do. And he'll never pump gas himself. Secret Service will do that for him. But there's just so many decisions, and I go through them, that the national debt, again, and he says he's not going to negotiate on it. So many decisions that are intentionally damaging. I mean, you can't say, well, yeah, that's a problem, and we'll have to work that out. No, he can't say that. He said, I'm not going to negotiate anything. Just raise it. That's not going to happen in Washington, and he should know that. He's a senator. He's the senator who was assigned to drive gun control through Congress after Sandy Hook, and of course, nothing happened. So it's just. Oh, and my other favorite Biden story is that Obama put him in charge of government transparency. He wanted to have the most transparent government administration in history. He put Biden in charge of it. Biden called a meeting, government-wide meeting, and closed it. No, I mean, close it to the public and the press. We want to talk about transparency, but you can't hear. I mean, it's just so insane. That's the only thing you can call it. So anyway, I wanted to what's the word? Make a list, boom, 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 of the things that he is. You can argue some presidents do things and then say, well, you disagree with the policy, but it doesn't seem aimed at damaging the country. But his do.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that the American public has responded to this. I mean, Joe Biden's approval ratings are not anything to write home about. They never have been. Now, he managed to eke out basically a small loss in the midterms when he probably deserved to have a much bigger loss, thanks in part to Republicans sort of fumbling the midterms. But when you're looking at what he's going to do, he's going to have to make a decision here pretty quick whether or not he's going to run for a second term. And I don't know if you think this, but all the indications I'm seeing is that he's going to run again.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you run on.
Yeah.
What is it? The only thing he can run on is I'm not Trump.
Well, that's it. That's the big platform. But also, he just defies facts. Afghanistan was an extraordinary success, the withdrawal. Service people got killed. Thousands didn't get evacuated. He went back on his promise to get everybody out who wanted out. He wasn't going to tax people under $400,000, and now we are. He says we're still not. And if a reporter asks him a question that he doesn't want to answer, he just walks away. But because he's got a sympathetic media, nobody blows the whistle. and goes, wait a minute. Presidents can't do that. But he does. And he gets away with it. I don't know. I guess I don't know, so I should shut up.
Oh goodness, we didn't even get a chance to really talk about that New York Times episode with the revolt at the New York Times. The second revolt in the last 3 or 4 years, I guess. They revolted 3 or 4 years ago in the Dean Baquet era because the opinion editor decided to greenlight a column that Tom Cotton wrote about actual policy, right? Which is like a nothing burger. And that's an easy dunk. You always
the opinion editor who was told we want a wide variety, diversity of opinion.
Right. So this last week, or a couple of weeks, over the last couple of weeks, there's been a staff revolt again at the New York Times because they found out a couple of years ago that they run the joint, right? And this time around, decided to link arms with a transgender activist community activist group, and sign a letter. It's had 200 signatures on it, including some of the Times staffers and the activists, and a couple of Hollywood celebrities were on this, demanding that they re-strategize their coverage to be much more sympathetic to transgenders and to commit to having more representation of transgenders in the newsroom, Andrew. And it didn't pan out too well for them this time around, did it?
No, it didn't. You're right. They seem to have gotten some testosterone, the editors. It's a new executive editor, Joseph Kahn.
Right.
And I don't know that much about him, but he's acted completely differently, and so have his deputies. He has to have the support of the publisher to do that, and this publisher is the same one who turned around and allowed the firing of the opinion editor 2 years ago. So I'm not sure how confident you can be in his decisions, but it's having worked there for so long, it's bizarre, is what it is. That kind of stuff never happened. I mean, the editorial board, which in those days had 10 or 12 people on it, had a weekly lunch in which they had people in, and they ordered deli sandwiches, and they had experts in who would talk sometimes on the record, sometimes off the record. And they were really interesting people. I mean, important people. And the opinion editor said, well, if you want to come up sometime. So I did, but I had to get permission to go up to the 10th floor to sit in on these lunches. And they looked askance at me like, why do you want to do that? I said, well, I can learn things about these issues. This guy's off the record. He's going to say things we won't get otherwise. But there was a distinct demarcation between business and editorial, and between editorial and the editorial who wrote the editorials, and didn't have quite so many columnists. That's where they parked people who they want to get out of their position, but they don't want to fire them, so they give them a signature as an opinion columnist upstairs. Well, I don't know if it's upstairs anymore. They're in a new building, but it's disappointing to see, well, the whole profession, but particularly the New York Times, to go down the tube like that. Having said that, I am a subscriber, mainly because of the foreign coverage. It's just so detailed, and they're everywhere. I mean, they have photographers in Bakhmut, and it's an amazing operation abroad. I was on that staff for a while, but then they got good.
Well, Andrew, I think that brings us into the
See if I got any.
I found a couple, by the way.
Good. Let's hear yours.
All right. Well, I'll do one of mine, then we can do one of yours. Okay. Which one of your kids will never grow up and move out of the house? Your husband.
Yeah.
All right. One of yours this time.
All right.
No, you're right.
Said Conan O'Brien, these are oldies. A mother in China gave birth to a 15-pound baby.
Oof,
Chinese official says it's so big it can do the work of 2 infants.
wow. And that's amazing.
That's major. That's major.
All right. Here's
no,
my,
go ahead.
my other one. Here's my other one. I wonder what my parents did to fight boredom before the internet. You know, I asked my 18 brothers and sisters and they didn't know either.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have the slightest idea. Well, finally, Jimmy Fallon, he said a Florida man was arrested for DUI driving a motorized shopping cart at Walmart. In fact, he led cops on a chase that reached 90 aisles per hour.
Wow. Now that's amazing.
90 aisles. I love it.
90 aisles an hour. Oh gosh. I probably saw that on Patrol Live.
Yeah. There's one other old one about Montana, which is, as you may know, wide open. There were football teams that travel 700 miles for away games. And the story, possibly apocryphal, is that a highway patrol stopped a rancher in his pickup and asked him, why were you going 120 miles an hour on the interstate? And the rancher said, because it was raining.
Also famously, no speed limits in Montana.
Well, yeah, okay. We can argue over that. I had to explain that to the Dan Rather team, and they ignored me. But every state has what's called the basic rule. And the basic rule is don't drive beyond what conditions permit.
Right.
You can't take that away. That just exists. It's like oxygen. Every state has it. So when Bill Clinton passed his 55 mile an hour, Montana threw out the speed limits, but they still had the basic rule. But that didn't fit the image of Montana. So they had to portray Montana as these crazy people. They're not. They're just sort of libertarian.
I was going to say, I don't think that's crazy.
No, that's exactly right.
I don't think it's crazy.
Exactly right. Who's going to drive? Who's going to drive 70 on ice? No
one. All right, Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter at AH Malcolm on the Twitters, is the regent of redstate.com. Always great talking with you. I promise that I will actually do some research on jokes before we start the podcast next week.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I'm looking forward to talking to you then.
Okay, buddy. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you then.
Now that the political infighting is over and the sausage is being made in the House, it's time for Republicans to unite with one cause and fight back against Joe Biden and his radical administration. The GOP has promised to investigate Biden family corruption, the border, big tech censorship collusion, the origins of COVID, the FBI, and intel agencies' attacks on the American people, and more. And it's time to hold them to those promises. Here at Hot Air, we won't let up on holding them accountable. We unapologetically fight back against the radical left and squishy rhinos in Congress who fail the people. We bring you the truth and go to war against Biden's woke communist agenda. But we need your help. By becoming a VIP for hotair.com, you can help us in this battle for our country. Just look at the House Democrats leader Hakeem Jeffries. He's another divisive radical leftist, and his communist Sesame Street speech proves it. If Republicans don't halt the Biden agenda and conservative media fails to hold them accountable, it could mean the end of our great country. Join us in the fight. Become a Hot Air VIP member or a VIP Gold member today and use the promo code SAVEAMERICA to receive a 40% discount on your membership. Stand with us and fight to save America. We will never give up. And thank you very much.